Welcome to this session about restraint and seclusion. My name is Beth Tolley. I am the Director of Educational Strategy for the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I'm also the parent and grandparent of kids who challenge the adults around them. Let's start by defining physical restraint. A restraint immobilizes or reduces the ability of a student to move his arms or legs, his body, and his head and neck. It doesn't include a physical escort. Seclusion is the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or an area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. So what about calming rooms? You've probably heard about these. Calm down corners or amygdala reset areas within the classroom can be useful for students who need help to regain their calm. The use of these are driven by the student. The student can leave the area at any time. But you need to be aware that seclusion rooms are often labeled with names such as the calm down room or the quiet room. Don't be fooled by this. If the child is prevented from exiting the room or the area, it is seclusion. Restraint and seclusion are used in public schools, private schools, specialized schools for children beginning preschool up through 12th grade. These procedures are used across the United States and across the world. Students with disabilities are disproportionately restrained and secluded. According to the most recent data from the 2017-2018 school year, disabled students are restrained and secluded more often in special schools. That's something to be alert about. Students with disabilities account for just 13% of all students, but 80% of the students restrained and 77% of students secluded. Black and Indigenous students are also disproportionately restrained and/or secluded. Black students comprise 15% of the school population, but 27% of students restrained and 23% of students secluded. Restraint and seclusion are intended as crisis management techniques to keep students and staff safe in situations where there's a risk of serious bodily injury. In reality, they're often used to control and punish students. And these pictures are some you might have seen on the evening news or in the newspaper. Teachers and staff often believe that they need to be able to restrain and seclude kids in order to protect their safety and the safety of kids. Here are some statements made by teachers. I've been punched in the face more times than I could remember. I've been hit in the head with chairs. When you're done, it's exhausting. It's a rare day where you don't get hurt at all. And this classroom is one I've seen on the news a number of times, and you all may have too. And this is not about teacher bashing. These statements come from teachers who don't know another way. This is all they know. They haven't been taught about the neuroscience, all the research about trauma, everything we know now from the research over the past 30 years. So what we do know now is that the safety concern is a myth. Staff think they need restraint and seclusion as tools to keep themselves safe, but the data shows that when schools that do not restrain or seclude, of which there are many, the injuries, they're not the injuries to the students or the staff, not nearly the number of injuries. Well, there aren't injuries, but certainly you don't see injuries like you do in places where the staff and teachers seclude and restrain, because what happens in those situations is there's an escalation cycle between the student, between the student and the teacher that just escalates each other. There's a specific study that was done, and there are more studies too, but this one is quite impressive in the fact that they not only were able to, this is Grafton that has schools and special schools, and it also has residential psychiatric facilities and group homes. And throughout their facilities, they were able to completely eliminate seclusion and reduce restraint by more than 99%. And in their schools, they eliminated both. And they found that this led to cost savings, increased staff satisfaction, decreased staff turnover, and decreased injuries to students and staff. And in fact, they saved, last count I saw was $17 or $18 million over the period of years that they had been, since they changed to a trauma-informed approach and elimination of restraint and seclusion. They use the UCARA system, which is a method of using pads when students are aggressive, so that you don't hit the students, you just block the aggressive approaches. Students have died from restraint, a lot of students. The most recent that we're aware of are Max Benson, pictured up here on the top right, who was 13 when he was killed by being held in a prone restraint. That was in November 2018, and his infraction was kicking a wall. Cornelius Frederick was killed this year by being restrained in a prone restraint. He died later in a hospital, but he was essentially killed during the restraint because of the restraint. And his refraction was throwing a sandwich. And this is what I mean about the escalation of if this is the way students are managed, the escalation gets out of control. So, good golly, what am I hitting? So let's come back to whether restraint and seclusion actually keeps students, teachers, and staff safe. And emphatically, no. The use of these techniques often lead to trauma, including PTSD, to injuries, physical injuries, and sometimes they result in death, as you saw in the previous slides. Currently, there is no federal law governing the use of restraint and seclusion, and states have passed laws and regulations. Even in states with strong laws, restraint and seclusion are not restricted to situations where people are in danger. And again, it's the escalation cycle that happens when you meet a disruptive behavior with restraint or seclusion. This document, How Safe is a Schoolhouse, was developed by Jessica Butler from the Autism National Committee, and it provides information regarding each state's restraint and seclusion laws and regulations. So what do we know from neuroscience? We know that disruptive behaviors are often involuntary stress responses, the flight, fight, or freeze response. During a stress response, the survival part of the child's brain dominates, and the child has limited access to the thinking part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex. Changes to the middle ear limits the child's ability to hear certain frequencies, including the frequency of the human voice. Stress responses look like volitional behaviors, but they are not. This is, as I mentioned up here, they're involuntary stress responses. They happen, they're set off by a trigger below the level of consciousness, and the child's reflexive behavior is to move, to fight or flee, or to freeze because they're feeling very endangered. So who has stress responses? Students who have experienced trauma or who continue to experience toxic stress. Students who are neurodivergent, that is autistic kids, kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and students who have mental health challenges, especially anxiety and depression. Also, adults, all adults, and especially adults working with students. Emotional contagion escalates the behavior of the adults and the students. The classroom, this diagram may help to explain what happens with this escalation. Trauma, and I describe these kids that may experience either trauma or neurodivergence or a mental health concern. There are changes to the brain, structural and functional changes to the brain that occur with trauma. The brain becomes hypervigilant. The parts of the brain responsible for detecting safety or threat or danger become hyper alert for danger and threat. And if anything sets them off, which it's very easy for a brain that is hypervigilant to be set off out of fear, then the behavior, which is sometimes called distress behavior, sometimes called stress responses, we're talking about the same thing. That's a fight, flight, freeze behavior. And when the child behaves in ways that are not non-compliant, so the child is either fighting or trying to run away or not complying, which can be the freeze response, the demands are increased by the adults because they think the child's being defiant. The child's behaviors, the adult's behaviors escalate the child's fear and the signals to the part of the brain that detects danger and threat. And so the fight, flight, freeze behaviors increase, and the child is punished, and the trauma increases. So what can parents and caregivers do? First of all, learn your state's laws and regulations, and learn about your school's policies and practices regarding discipline, restraint, and seclusion. In some states, the IEP or 504 team can document reasons restraint or seclusion are contraindicated, or parents can provide a letter from the child's physician. A case can be made that these procedures are always contraindicated. What else can parents and caregivers do? Notice whether your child seems withdrawn or sad or doesn't want to go to school. These are clues that something may be happening at school that you're not aware of. Ask your child if he or she has been made to stay alone in a room, or if the adults at school have held her down or hit her. Children are often not going to tell their parents because they internalize these punishments. They think they must have done something wrong. So it's really critical that you assure your child that he or she is not in trouble and gently inquire compassionately what has happened. And of course, go to the school to ask the teacher about what is going on if they know why your child may be withdrawn or sad or not wanting to go to school. Some other recommendations include being proactive, and one of the very, very best things you can do is to develop a relationship with your child's teachers and support staff and with the administrative staff. Also, if the school personnel are not educated about involuntary stress responses, harm from the use of restraints and seclusion, or alternative approaches, such as trauma-informed approaches, neuroscience-aligned, and relationship-based approaches. Educate them, and there are resources in a reference list that's included with this session. Another thing you can do is join the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and here's some information about that. You see listed the website, the Facebook page, the Twitter page, the Instagram address, and also the this last reference is a Facebook series where we interview experts in the field of education and special education and trauma-informed practices. I want to thank you all for your attention and give special thanks to Guy Stevens, who is the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And I want to thank him for his help with this presentation.